Good morning. This is Jason Dean here at Film Fanatic YouTube channel. So, I hope everyone's doing good. This is the second video. I'm doing another video today. I went to go see this movie last night that is called Society, and I had never seen it before. And I came across this movie through the Waldoboro Theater, which is located in Waldoboro, Maine. Waldoboro, I live in Northport, and Waldoboro is roughly maybe just about an hour or so away from my place here in Northport. Um, and I remember years back that theater was a pretty active theater. They used to have lots of concerts, a lot of local music, based a lot of music that a lot of the concerts that they would have there were based around a lot of local acts. Years and years ago, there was this jazz jam that used to happen in Waldoboro, and was at this building that was called the Waldo Annex, and it's kind of connected to the Waldo Theater, and basically it was like a house, or this beautiful, gorgeous, sprawling house that was, I believe it was like run by the historical society. It's I think it was from like the 1800s, and basically it was a house that was kind of preserved, and just a gorgeous house. And they used to host a jazz jam in this building for many many years. And I remember too, like I've talked about a lot about my history here, around Maine and whatnot. But back many many years ago, when I was going to school and I would come up to Maine, one of the other jams that was happening was there was a jazz jam at this place, the Waldo Theater Annex, and I remember going to it a couple times, and it was great. The people who kind of ran the jam they'd set up a bunch of things for like where you could get food and snacks, and they would have alcohol, wine and beer, and there was like a house band that they had, and they had it was all inside in this really beautiful kind of living room in this really beautiful house, and they would have this open jazz jam, and you could sit in, and it was really loose and informal, but it was really great. And there was this piano player, Charlie Betcheler, who he passed away, unfortunately, about probably 6 or 7 years ago. And he was kind of the curator or the host of the whole jam, and he would put together different different configurations. He more or less had like a house band that he had to do the jam, and basically people could sit in, and they would play a set of music, and people would kind of come and go, and it was awesome. And I used to go to it, and it was one of those things where I was really really nervous and intimidated because the whole jazz thing was so new to me, and I used to go. It was always on Sundays, and I used to go to it, and it was pretty amazing. It was a real eye opening experience. And then after a period of time, when I got the nerve, after going there for a while, I was just listening. I finally got the nerves to kind of sit in and sit in with those guys. And Charlie Betcher was an amazing musician, an amazing player. And after a couple of years or so, I remember Charlie had asked me if I wanted to, become, the regular house drummer for the for the jam. And I was really, really honored that he asked me to do it, and I was really excited. So I started doing it, and then for probably about 3 or 4 years, I was the regular drummer who was part of the band for the jazz jam, and we would get paid to be there. And it was the same kind of scenario. I'd bring my drums. There'd be Charlie would be was an amazing piano player. He would write a lot of his own tunes. He also would do these arrangements of like old jazz standards. And there was always a really great bass player that would show up. There was this girl, Zara Adelberg, who was an amazing player. She used to always come. There would always be various horn players. My great friend who I've talked a lot about, Mike Whitehead, he would always be there. Um, it was really great. And then after about a year or so of that, of playing there, Charlie Betchel had asked me if I was interested in basically, playing gigs with him, and he was putting together a band, um, like a quintet, quartet, and sometimes he'd have a trio. So I was like, yeah, definitely, let's do it. And I jumped at the chance because Charlie was, a real. He was also a teacher. He taught a lot of music in the area. I believe he taught at UMA at one point, but he also taught privately. Just an amazing, history of music and experience that he had. So I started playing gigs with him, and we would play, around the mid coast. We used to play a lot of gigs in Camden, Maine, and around the area. We'd play like concerts, and we'd play these, parties that would be at people's houses and various events. And it was really, really hard. But Charlie, I don't know, he was really, it was one of those. I feel like Charlie was one of those guys that really kind of took me under his wing, and I really looked up to him in a lot of ways. And he was really, because he saw that I was struggling with trying to learn this new language, but I don't know, he saw something in what I was doing or whatnot, so he decided to work with me, and I really learned a lot with playing with him, and I got to know Charlie really really well, and learned a lot about his background and his past. One of Charlie's biggest accomplishments when he was younger, because at that time when I started playing with him, he was in his mid to late 60s, but he had various health problems and whatnot, but he had, uh, you know, he was still really, really alert, and he had all his faculty. He was still a great player, but he had health issues, and he he was a kind of a complicated guy sometimes to kind of communicate. A lot of the times he wouldn't necessarily verbalize what he wanted or what he was or what he was looking for. He would just kind of assume that you would try to, you know, dial it in what he was kind of putting out there. So it was like a real, big learning experience. Not only how to work with somebody who had a real, I don't know, kind of unconventional way of communicating ideas, but his music was pretty unconventional. But Charlie had, back in the '70s, when he was young, in his 20s, he had a jazz group that was a pretty semi-famous jazz group, and they were called Osmosis. And Osmosis was like a group in the '70s that they recorded a couple albums for I think one or two major labels. I think they did an album. I think there was two albums that they put out. One of them, I believe, was on CBS Records, and they recorded it, I believe, in New York. And they were like this real interesting kind of mix of early jazz mixed in with like some rock. So they had this like fusion kind of sound. And one of their biggest claim to fame was they played at I think it was the Newport Jazz Festival, and his band actually opened up for Miles Davis, the Miles Davis Quintet, and pretty wild. So it was, when I learned about Charlie and his background and saw him play, because he was a really amazing player, especially at that time. I was, and then of course when I learned about his background, I jumped at the opportunity to do whatever I could to play with him, even though it was really hard and it was a big challenge. I just knew, like, the end result of that experience, I would, it would really further my education, and so it was a wonderful experience. And during that time, the Waldo Theater was going on, and the Waldo Theater at that time was, kind of at the tail end, because people weren't really showing up to it as much, and it needed a lot of work. It needed a lot of like construction, and it needed to basically, it was starting to fall apart. And I remember Charlie and I had played a gig there once, and it was kind of, pretty dilapidated, and it needed a lot of paint, and The chairs were not in great condition, and the acoustics weren't great. It was kind of a shell, and eventually that place closed for quite a few years. And then, like, I think it was about maybe 2 years ago or so, there there was some kind of grant that I believe the Waldo Theater or the Waldo Society was able to get, and they were able to get all of this money, and they were able to put it into refurnishing and basically rebuilding the Waldo Theater. And the last, I believe it's like just within the last 4 or 5 months, like maybe the springtime of this year, they started to they reopened the theater, the Waldo Theater, and they started having um, movies. They started showing lots of free showings of movies, and then they I believe they started having some like concerts there, and there was all of this new kind of buzz around this theater. And then over the summer, I noticed, and I was following it, and I was like, "Oh, that's cool!" Like, and I had not been to the theater, to that theater in many, many, many years. And then, really, fairly recently, I think it was like in the springtime, there was a group that became part of the Waldo Theater called Waldo After Dark, and I remember looking and checking out what this group was doing, and they were basically set out. They set out to show a lot of these, you know, kind of underground '80s, '70s B movies, you know, movies that could be kind of considered grindhouse movies. And they started showing all of these bizarro movies at the theater, and I was like, wow, like that's amazing. Like, when do you get to see that? And I was really excited about that. And I remember about a month ago, I they've been showing all of these movies, and I had not been able to go to any of them. So I was like chomping at the bit to actually go to one of their shows. And they were doing it. They were showing these movies like I think twice a month, and they were usually on like Saturday nights. So I really jumped at the chance to try to go to it, but I couldn't because of my schedule. And I remember maybe about a month ago, I messaged, I reached out to the theater and just to say, hey, you know, this looks like a really cool thing, you know, and then I inquired about, you know, kind of what they're doing, and I said, well, you know, I have a movie page. I have three pages that I run, you know, the YouTube now, and then a Facebook page and Instagram. It's called Film Fanatic, and a lot of the movies that I show and that I talk about are very much, you know, very similar to what you guys are doing. And, you know, I was saying how this is really exciting, and I'm, you know, definitely excited to go to a movie there. And who knows, maybe in the future we could, you know, maybe join forces and do some kind of an event together. And they were very cool. They got right back to me, and we chatted for quite a while, and you know, very very open, and very very cool. And so this past Saturday, actually last night, was the first time I was able to go to the theater, and I was my first impression of going to the theater was I didn't even recognize the theater. I mean, it's a gorgeous theater. They redid everything. The seating, the acoustics are amazing. The sound is amazing. Uh, the the uh, the space is great. They reinforce the sound. It's a gorgeous theater, like simply an amazing theater. The seating is great. They have a really awesome kind of balcony area. They do basically it's like $10 to go to a movie, and it's totally worth it. They have like a little raffle thing inside. They you know, and they give away a lot of free like stickers and things like that. But they have this amazing series, and they do this like twice a month where they show these kind of weird, you know, grindhouse B movies, you know. And so I saw like around Halloween, which was last weekend, they had one of the movies that they did show was Let's Scare Jessica to Death, and I just did a show on Film Fanatic about that movie, and it's one of my all-time favorite horror movies. I think it's one of the creepiest horror movies ever made. Totally under the radar, but they had a showing of that last week, and I was like, kind of, aggravated that I couldn't go. But this last night I was able to go for the first time, and I was like really blown away by the setup there, and it's a gorgeous theater. Um, and I went to this movie. The movie I saw was this movie called Society, and it came out in 1989, and it's this like horror mystery sci-fi movie. And I went into it totally cold. I looked at the general when they had posted the event on Facebook. I just I didn't look at the trailer. I just looked at the general synopsis that basically it looked like this, mid '80s or early '80s, you know, sci-fi horror, B movie kind of thing, and it just looked awesome. And I didn't look at any trailers. I didn't read anything really about the story. I just was like, I gotta go. So I went on a total whim, and I went with my great friend Aaron Kirkpatrick, and it was totally like not really a planned thing. And I was blown away by this movie. It was directed by Brian Yuznas, and I was blown away by it. And it was shot all in England, and it's it's a total like body horror movie, and it's this real critique of like working class versus the extreme wealthy. And the last uh, 20 minutes of this film is just completely kind of jaw dropping. The practical effects are just unbelievable, and it's super bizarre, super out there, super wacky, and the practical effects in the film are just like unbelievable. It's some of the most impressive effects I've ever seen, and I was blown away. I had never seen this movie, never heard about it before, and I just thought this movie was amazing. Like I definitely really need to seek this movie out. And it came out in 1989, like I said, directed by Brian Yuznas, and it stars Billy Warlock, who is like the lead, who is amazing in it. And he's the lead, more or less kind of the hero of the story, but and again, I never had seen him before, but in seeing this film on the screen, a lot of the times, which is a problem and sometimes kind of drives me crazy, is when they show a lot of these films or they bring back classic movies or older movies to a lot of theaters. They typically will show like DVD copies of the movie or some kind of digital. Basically, it's like kind of it looks like it comes across as like a DVD being broadcast, or being shown in a theater, and the transfer is always kind of off, and it's never really that the quality is never really great, and it's usually disappointing because the transfer isn't there, the ratio is off. But occasionally you get to see a movie when and it's all like the ratio is intact, and I believe that this film was shown with its original in its original format, where they actually they had showed the actual film print. So the quality of it was pretty amazing. The sound and the picture was like super crystal clear. The sound system in the Waldo Theater is killer, and so I can't recommend it enough. But if you're looking for something a really fun and unusual experience, I definitely suggest going out to any of these films that they show. Um, it's a pretty wonderful thing that they have, and it's real special. The one thing too that was really cool was there wasn't a whole lot of people there, but there was a pretty decent group of people there to see this totally bizarre movie, and people were totally into it. It was, people were like talking to the screen, people were laughing, and like, kind of gasping at some of the real, you know, somewhat grotesque parts of the film, but it was it felt like everybody there was like totally into the movie and just reacting to the film, and you could hear everybody's reactions, and it was great. It was a really great, even though there wasn't a whole lot of people there, it felt like a really cool event of like how the movie theater experience should really be, like this interactive thing. And yeah, I give it up to the Waldo Theater and Waldo After Dark for showing these films, and I'm very very excited, and I definitely highly recommend this film. It's a just an amazing film, super entertaining on so many levels. So I'm definitely gonna make it a point to when I can to go to as many of these films as I can, and also go into it as cold as I possibly can, so I can have that experience. So thanks again. This is Jason Dean, and again, if you get a chance, check out Society from 1989, an amazing film, and also keep your eyes out for Waldo After Dark. They're all over Facebook. They do a really great thing about. They do a lot of great promotion for their events, and it's a wonderful gem of an experience. So, thanks again, and we'll see you next time.